terrorism, global control, and corruption. History. Repeating itself. Wars are based on lies. No country, nation, or politician who goes to war will ever tell the truth. Everyone says it is for a good cause, such as to instill democracy, fight terrorism, protect the land, or display patriotism. They even bring religion as a reason. The news backs them up with their stories, willing to create new enemies out of the imagined false narratives, flip the narrative, and make the viewers believe they are the innocent ones, the ones being attacked. But how innocent is the United States as a nation? Who owns the media in the United States? Why are we unable to see what the international media says about us? Why is our narrative so different from everyone else's? If you look at who owns CNBC, Fox News, and CNN at the top of the shareholder list, you will find Vanguard and BlackRock. When you look at the major shareholders for pharmaceuticals like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, you will also find Vanguard and BlackRock at the top of the list. Look at the major shareholders of the biggest airline companies. Who are they? The same corporations. What about the junk and processed foods pushed down our throats through the media? What about Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Google, and X? It doesn't take long to get on the internet and look at the shareholder lists of these giant corporations. But do me a favor. When you look at the corporations, please also look at the backgrounds of those who founded them or run them in the present. Look at who they are, what they stand for, what they have done, and what their principles and values are. In an interview on The Breakfast Club, Robert F. Kennedy exposed how the corporate overlords plan to own real estate in the United States by 2023 to purchase 60% of the single-family homes. There are three giant corporations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which collectively own each other, so it's really one giant corporation. But they also own 89% of the S&P 500. They own everything. Ever since I joined Facebook in 2015, the purpose of my page has been to promote global economic and financial news and information. The World Economic Forum was the first page I joined to increase my knowledge before I could share it with others. I was not aware of this organization's future plans, but I realized something was not right soon after I started digging more into this page's information and views. Economics is about the exchange of activities, products, or services with created values and the impact of those interactions. However, the topics discussed on the World Economic Forum page were more about consolidating resources and preventing future events. In April 2020, I posted the Sustainability Development Plans from Agenda 21, Event 201, and Agenda 2030. They seemed very important news to share, as few to none of the United States citizens knew about it. I posted something as, last but not least, Agenda 2030 is a commitment to eradicate poverty and achieve sustainable development worldwide by 2030, ensuring no one is left behind. It has been in the works since 1972 on the United Nations Conference about Human Environment, tackling all matters of problems that people faces around the globe, converting this into an inclusive way to leave no one behind. Seems a dreamy way to get equality for everyone at every level. However, this also means the redistribution of wealth. In order for this to be accomplished, people must be gathered and migrate to the cities for a greater control of the population and natural resources. So, after reading all this, what do you think caused the pandemic? Or should I ask, who do you think caused it? As I previously posted on my Facebook page, which was permanently deleted by Facebook, the Federal Reserve in many countries is acquiring greater ownership of private institutions. Look at how many times the Fed has bailed out companies in the US. The same thing happened in Europe. Such a global happening is something that has never been seen before. However, I am sure it is beyond just one of our local governments. It makes me wonder who is planning all this and why. What about each country's culture and identity? Events and happenings like the Black Swan, coronavirus pandemic, climate change, and global monetary control leave no doubt in my mind that it is the start of a global totalitarian control. Now, I try to post as much as I can to make people aware of what is going on, but I know it can be hard for everyone to understand if it's not put in a timeline, which is why I am writing this book. The big difference between those who came to this country as young adults, i.e., who did not study in the U.S. elementary and high school system, and those who were born or grown up here, is that the former spent their childhood developing themselves outside of the box of a social, cultural idealism imposed by the USA, and now former President Trump is intoxicating the people with offensive words about immigrants, literally saying, immigrants poison the blood of this country, when he should remember that everyone in this country is an immigrant, who stole the land from the natives and also the southern region from Mexico. Everyone should remember and know that they don't do the jobs the immigrants do at the farms, clean toilets, or risk their lives in construction, or when they have to climb up buildings to clean windows. Everyone should know that whether they have Social Security or not, they still must pay taxes, and unfortunately they don't receive the Social Security retirement that you will receive as a citizen. The only benefits they get is for their children, live food stamps, free education, and Medicare for their kids. But they do not receive anything. Those at the top also know that giant nations like the United States and China require a lot of labor to support the economy. The number one reason China is struggling is because their one-child policy. The US government knows this. They live of those taxes collected from the immigrants too. As you can see, millionaires and billionaires with the tax loophole communists they live in, they do not have to pay it. Taxes are for the employee and the poor, because as long as you keep advancing the ladder, your pay increases, and so will your tax bracket, and more taxes to be paid. However, those at the top live in a communist socialist world, but they don't want you to know that is only allow for them while you believe in capitalism, because it's progressive. Meanwhile, Trump is speaking hatred against one community, while the Washington Examiner article from June 20, 2023, titled, "Military Hopes to Solve Recruitment Nightmare by Appealing to Legal Authority to Recruit People Without Green Cards and Bestow Expedited Citizenship During War Times." I have seen many people on social media outraging on the illegal immigrants crossing the border. Many have signed up online to be enlisted, creating hatred against immigrants when they are going to do a job that the US citizens don't want to do. They feel entitled to receive something they do not even work hard to get. Others are going to the extreme to die for a country that is not even theirs. I hope the government fulfills the promise of their citizenship. We need to change this negative attitude, once again created by the media. In fact, let's change the whole media. I was only 21 years old when I came to the US. I was asked where I was from numerous times, but nobody knew where Ecuador, my home country, was located. Most people only thought of me as Mexican and not as a Latino or Hispanic. They only thought of the US as America and Mexico as South America. They would ask me if I knew how to make tamales when I had never had a tamal or burrito in my entire life. I call this poor mentality and lack of cultural knowledge. Growing up in Ecuador, I had to learn all the names of all countries and their capitals in school. I was also taught where they existed on the globe, as well as some basic information about their cultures. Here I was, in apparently the most powerful country in the world, with its people having no clue who their neighbors were. The people in the US are fed lots of ego and pride about their country's flag and history, but they are told a history that is not even true, such as that about Thanksgiving or how it became a holiday, the Revolutionary War, the banking system, or the education system. In fact, all those corporations throughout the years have played their role in keeping people blind to the outside world. This is done deliberately, so they can keep the masses on their knees, asking them for jobs while the government takes a huge percentage of their money, as it keeps them in slavery. Have you seen how many holidays Europeans have? How many PTOs do they have a year? In some countries, a year of employment earns employees a whole month of PTO. Most people own their houses and land, and while they may not have as many luxuries, they have peace of mind. They do not worry about what would happen if they can't find a job. Healthcare is affordable. At both private and public health institutions, the doctors provide prescriptions for the patient to make the decision to buy the medicine and from where they can afford it. Also, once they have the prescription, instead of going to the doctor's office again and paying for another appointment, they just go straight to the pharma store and buy the medicine from their prior prescription. On the other hand, the USA has restrictions and third parties, like the insurance companies, who take money from the government and the employer. And when an employee gets an appointment, they still need to pay a copay. For example, you go to the doctor and buy your medication from them. It costs them $2, and the doctor sells it to you for $5, but because you have insurance, the doctor can't disclose how much they would sell it to you and charge this to the insurance company, saying it costs $15. You pay a copay of $5, and the difference is negotiated by the giant insurance companies with the small company, at which the small company ends up losing and just getting at cost, while the insurance gets everything. What kind of theft is that? Many don't understand it because no one makes others aware of it, but it is right in front of your eyes. South America doesn't have a 30-plus year mortgage. In the US, it is considered normal, and if you don't pay it, your property goes back to the bank for repossession. The US claims to have an immigrant problem, But the only people who were crossing the border were very poor Mexicans. There is a lot of corruption on the border, and most of them are natives, as in any other country in Central and South America. Did you know that ever since Bukele was elected, no Salvadorians have been coming through the borders? In fact, many are going back. But we see more Venezuelans now. Why? Because their country was disrupted several years ago, but no one talks about it or even how it started. I will explain how it started. There are always two sides to a story, but the US media only presents its own, and the citizens believe everything they are told. I am not blaming the people. If I grew up here, I might have been brainwashed too. I knew better because I grew up in another country and saw others' perspectives. In the US, we are always taught that our problems are someone else's fault, that other countries envy us or are jealous, and that is why they attack us. But if you visit other countries, you will find that their view is completely different. Nobody is envious or jealous. In fact, they are angry at the US for the authoritarian position its government takes around the globe, imposing rules and sanctions on other countries. The US takes advantage of its position to control and dominate other countries' international rates. This is why the creation of other currencies that can displace the US dollar has been in the works for years. This time, I believe they might accomplish the goal. Roman Empire. In my previous work, Uncovering the System Never-Ending Slavery, I omitted a detailed exploration of historical transactions and the evolution of money. The very first empire with great success was the ancient Roman Empire. The Romans implemented an infantry servian system when the city of the Romans was small. They collected their own taxes and leveraged this as a percentage of an individual's wealth, as opposed to income, as the government does. This involved sending someone to the people's land, homes, and real estate, measuring it, and counting their slaves, personal items, and all possessions, including animals. They tallied their possessions every 5 years as part of the census. The gathered information was used to assess and classify people into property classes, which also dictated their military roles. The wealthiest were expected to supply more equipment, determining their class within the military system. For instance, those in Class 1, with property and assets valued at around 100,000, were equipped with helmets, round shields, greaves, cuirasses, spears, and swords. While those in Class 5, with only 11,000 in property and assets, would have been equipped with slings and stones, reflecting less tough to their name. The standard average wealth tax averaged around 1%, but during wartime or other unprecedented circumstances, it rose to around 3%. As the country grew, it became challenging to assess wealth properly in order to collect taxes. Additionally, conquest added more and more of the state's revenue, reducing the need to focus on developing a proper state and managing the taxation system. The Roman Republic had enriched itself through wars to the point that it no longer needed to impose a wealth tax on its Italian citizens. However, you would ask, how can wars enrich a nation? My question is, have you ever seen a white-collar worker wanting to do blue-collar jobs? Who made all the Roman stuff? The workers, employees, and their slaves. The main purpose of the Roman Empire was rooted in wars aimed at conquering territories and people. The conquered individuals were then put to work while also being charged with taxes. Do we see this in our modern society? The Roman success was hinged on conquest and slavery, with soldiers contributing to constructing towns, ports, roads, and fortresses, while the emperor asserted control over the army and mines. However, soldiers received generous pay from the royals for their loyalty. Rome was skilled at managing foreign labor and capital, exploiting resources, and imposing taxes on imports and exports. They reshaped the countries they settled in by draining swamps and lakes, turning forests into farmland, and constructing irrigation systems. However, this came at the expense of mistreated and exploited people, often enslaved to create lands and entire countries. In examining the inflation trends in the Roman Empire, and the rise in the prices of goods and services over time, one wonders how the Romans coped with inflation. The only way to measure money without a strong set of data and information is by the circulation of money and how it was stimulated in the economy. The Romans entered the monetary system later than the Greeks. They first produced their own currency in the 4th century BC, and used their coins as a way to trade and set values for goods. Before this, Romans engaged in a bartering system, but as their empire expanded, they started producing coins. The early Romans did not mint their own coinage, relying on a system of bronze weights known as aes rude, which were large chunks of raw bronze. This was impractical for long-term use as 1 AES rood was around 324 g, almost a pound of bronze. This system continued until 218 BC. As the Roman Empire expanded, the stolen valuable metals were collected and produced. Even though silver coins were more practical, the Roman Empire lacked silver mines, forcing it to acquire silver coins through plundering or trade. However, this wasn't a practical negotiation in imports and exports, and the First Punic War put tremendous strain on the Romans in terms of both currency and dead citizens. Fewer people, less taxes. They lost a large number of fleets, and with the lack of a large amount of silver, they were able to mint about 6.5 million silver coins for the war, relying entirely on combat loot and bronze coinage to fund the war. As inflation took over, less coinage and more debt, the purity of silver coins became diluted, declining from 98% to 75%, with the remaining 25% being copper or other added metals. The 75% diluted silver coins quickly became less valuable as the war continued. The heavy AES grave and E signatum were melted down to make less valuable coins, supplying the state with metals. By the end of the First Punic War, almost no silver was involved in producing silver coins. Remember, the merchants used silver as a value of exchange, which was the only way to retain their face value. This shift made the Italian coinage less valuable, necessitating a need for more coins to obtain the products and services. Victory in the war brought some relief to Rome as Carthage paid huge amounts of silver to Rome as part of the settlement. Rome used this silver to return to minting pure silver. Rome's coinage system became more fragile when the Second Punic War broke out. People started hoarding the purer silver coins, creating a bigger demand and a very short supply. The purpose was to hold on to the higher value coins while they got rid of the junk or less valuable coins. Rome's entire supply depended on Carthage's Spanish silver by this point. However, when this dependency stopped, Rome's mints immediately began devaluing its currency, and the silver coins further reduced in value. Sacred gold was also melted into aurei coins, but this was not enough. After Carthaginian general Hannibal won several victories against the Roman Republic, and the bronze supply was non-existent, Rome began to mint the equivalent of a fiat currency. The Roman pound was split into 6, and each bronze coin was known as the as. This was expected to be traded as if it was worth a full pound. This reminds me of the modern fiat currency we currently have. In Latin, the word fiat means "it shall be." Fiat money is not backed by any commodity, such as gold or silver. In modern times, it is designated by the issuing government to be a country's legal tender, as the government is responsible for maintaining its value. Since the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971, all major currencies in the world have been fiat money. Within a decade, almost no AES grave or AES signatum remained in circulation in the Roman cities. The only thing keeping Rome in constant wars was the intervention of Hero II of Syracuse, who loaned enormous sums of silver to Rome, forcing them into an increased debt. As the war stabilized, the expenditures created a huge downfall in Rome's economy. The old currency was replaced with the introduction of the denarius. This new silver coin weighed half as much as the old quadrigatus, but was pure silver. The AS was introduced as a standardized bronze coin, 10 of which were worth 1 denarius. This new coin became the main currency of the Roman Empire for the next 500 years. With the victories of Scipio Africanus in the Second Punic War, the Romans gained full control of the silver mines in Spain, and the Roman currency was stabilized. In the following years, the Romans put more pressure on the Mediterranean countries, now Roman states, by melting down millions of other silver coins, restricting them to Roman coins only, and establishing the denarius as the dominant currency to be utilized. In modern times, Bretton Woods was created in 1944 after World War II, and lasted until 1971. It had the main purpose of maintaining an economically internationally regulated system to promote the exchange rate stability, prevent competitive devaluation, and set up a restrictive trade policy where the US dollar was going to be the main and only currency of exchange across the globe for participating countries, or should I say for those countries under the same ruler. The Bretton Woods Conference practically never ended, even though it formally did, and led to the establishment of the International Monetary Fund and the IBRD, now called the World Bank, which is fully functioning to this day. As the Romans established the denarius as the main currency, the Second Punic War forced the Romans to use cash. Coins were used for most transactions and salaries instead of just for tax and governmental purposes. In 141 BCE, the denarius was revalued to 16 asses and remained stable, but the increase in silver supply and decrease in bronze weight standards brought the economy to high inflation. As the Roman economy flourished and demand for goods and services increased, so did the prices. The excess of silver and almost a century of civil wars caused the Romans to resume minting gold coins in bulk. After the ascension of Augustus and the end of civil wars, the economy finally stabilized once again. Jews in the Roman Empire. Roman involvement in Judea started in 63 BC when Pompey took Jerusalem and sieged Jerusalem. Judea was already divided into classes, ethics, and religion. As a result, they were already unstable, making the Roman efforts easier to conquer. Jerusalem was established as the capital, and under King Solomon, the construction of the First Temple, a symbol of spiritual and political unity, was foreseen. However, the division already in existence led to the division of the kingdom in Jerusalem into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. This division laid the background for political and religious culture. Most Jews became scholars of the law, taught religion, and became clerks. Jews lived across the Roman Empire and became a significant part of the Roman population, an estimated population of 7 million at the time. The Roman Empire protected them. This reminds me of the AIPAC, which we have in lobbying Congress in the United States. But why were they protected? The Romans had a system similar to that of the USA in modern days, the legislative, judicial, and executive systems. Rome had a good reason to tolerate the Jewish religion. Most importantly, Rome wanted to keep the people of Judea from revolting, as they wanted to create their own state. This idealism has carried over to this day. The reason why the Queen granted land to Lionel de Rothschild, a banker whose family was wealthy through their gambling and money lending, and who had business over Europe, was the first Jew in parliament with Zionist idealism in Palestine. Why did the Queen grant lands that were supposed to be in another country? We know Lionel raised capital for war, and in return, the Queen accepted this declaration. But why the Queen? Who actually owns everything? I will answer this and get into more details later. The implemented system took great power over time. As the empire kept growing, the needs of the citizens also evolved in all aspects. The citizens were constantly fighting for greater equality with the elite. This is also something we currently see in our modern times, but as some of us have noticed, greater organizations have taken place globally to substitute the functions of those organizations locally in our own country, such as the World Health Organization taking absolute control over global health, via passing any other local authority. The Jews were strongly involved in the legislative and judicial systems, protected by Rome. They were allowed to continue their religion in Judea until a major revolution led to a change in the practice of their faith. Rome recognized Judaism as a legal religion, allowing them to worship freely. Even before Julius Caesar, Jews were famous for their money lending. However, during the time of Jesus, people also recognized that the Jews hung out in Rome during times of war to lend money. In the Bible, 2,000 years ago, Jesus drove the money changers out of the temple. This was the only time during Jesus' ministry he showed such rage and used force. Matthew 21:12-17. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. When Jews journeyed to Jerusalem to fulfill their temple tax obligation, they could only pay with a special coin, the half shekel of the century, a half ounce of pure silver. According to the Jewish religion, every male Jew over the age of 20 had to contribute half a shekel annually to the temple, considering it the only coin acceptable to God. However, these coins, without the image of a pagan emperor, were not plentiful, as the money changers hoarded the coins and monopolized the market. In response, they changed the price just like any other commodity would when the money supply was low. Here, we noticed who was behind the scarcity of the money supply, and the reason why, besides the purpose of increasing demand and price change. In other words, money changers were making a lot of money because they held a monopoly on money, and the Jews had to pay whatever they demanded to Jesus. This exploitation violated the sanctity of God's house, but this was not the only incident involving the money scam and the money changers. 200 years earlier, Rome grappled with money changers. Two early Roman emperors tried to diminish the power of the money changers by reforming usury laws and limiting land ownership to 500 acres. However, they were both assassinated. In 48 BC, Caesar reclaimed the power from the money changers, minting coins for the benefit of all. He started building public projects and gained the love and respect of the people, but earned the ire of Jewish money changers. Some people believe this was an important factor in Caesar's assassination, but his death certainly led to the demise of plentiful money in Rome. Taxes increased as the corruption continued, in the same way U.S. citizens are taxed. As a result, common people lost their lands and homes, and Rome completely decayed into nothing. This parallels the contemporary scenario in the USA, where citizens endure high taxes, contributing to infinite, never-ending wars and money laundering through philanthropic institutions, at the same time sending billions to a false Israel and Ukraine. Is this why the rabbis are teaching their new generation that they need a state of their own? In a recent video circulating on social media by Yosef Mizrachi, his exact words were, "Now the Jews are going to run away from America. Most of them are simulated. They have become goyim already, and so are their children. There is nothing to worry about because they're not Jewish, but those who are still religious will get up within a year or 2 or 5. We all have to run away from here. Once we leave this place, we will bury America. This is what is going to happen." These are the exact words and beliefs passed down from the same cult to the new generations. This seems to me like an old money mafia going on for generations that started since the beginning of the world, and if someone opposes it, they will be killed. In the Roman era, official powers existed, but they also had unofficial powers running the system from underground within every aspect of politics, religion, economics, sports, and the military. So-called gangs or mafia were used to monopolize the use of force in the hands of the government's agents. Another way to organize political power was through the clientela, a hierarchical social structure formed between patrons and their clients. Essentially, a powerful person would cultivate a semi-formal network of followers with favor being exchanged, and a lobbyist or a patron could help support their clients with loans, business deals, legal representation, marriage arrangements, and more. In exchange, the clients would offer loyalty and services to their patrons. Some of these favors might include doing the dirty work necessary to see that their boss's wishes were accomplished. Patrons would host daily meetings, which clients would attend to discuss their requests. The clientele were often leveraged for political gain, as they helped support patrons' political aspirations by voting for them and backing their campaign in any way possible. The fierce competition between Roman politicians, adversity, and contention could clash with their clientela. These would come to a time of physical conflicts between political gangs where armed followers could be used to intimidate voters, break up meetings, and directly threaten politicians. Another group was the collegia associations, which were based on shared interests. These were found in the suburban areas and sometimes would be involved in politics too. Another way was the religious mafia. The Romans were tolerant of many religious gangs and cults across the empire. Even foreign traditions were allowed to not only continue their faith, but others welcomed it too. However, altercations among cults were so frequent that they provoked constant investigations of crimes. The economics mafia was focused on groups based on economic pillars, often within the privatized public sectors and services, who would scam the people for personal gains. Some of them were the publicans, who were tax collectors and were despised by Jewish society and considered traitors to their own people because they worked for the Roman Empire, which was the occupying power collecting taxes on their behalf, and often cheated people by overcharging them to keep the extra money for themselves. This term referred to tax collectors who worked for the Roman Empire. Some publicans became serious predators and greedy. They would conduct illegal tax farming and insurance fraud claims to get the payments.